Welcome to the CEC Report for October 31st. I'm Elisa Barwick and with me is Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Elisa.
In this week's CEC Report, the red light is on as hockey declares Australia open for business. London predators want to entrap Russia, China and India Development Alliance, and NSA spying not for information, for intimidation. So firstly, the red light is on as hockey declares Australia open for business.
This is only a PG rated show, isn't it?
Yes.
Usually that's a term used for prostitution or houses of prostitution.
Yes, exactly, the red light district. So
Yeah.
we'll reveal what hockey's up to in this segment. Because the last few weeks, as our regular viewers will know, we've been looking at what this new government has in store for us, and they won't admit it openly, but what they're dealing with is the next phase of the global financial crisis. It wasn't done with in 2008. It wasn't over, it's continuing. And what hockey has done, three of the big initiatives of the last week or two, his commission of audit, his increase of the debt ceiling from a whopping 300 to a 500 billion, his additional $8.8 billion grant to the Reserve Bank to shore it up for any future issues. This all really reveals that they know that this crash is on the agenda, doesn't it, Craig?
Anyone that's in the financial industry that's actually thinking from the top down, that are in the know that this is coming. It's not rocket science. I've talked to many people that knew the previous global financial crisis was coming. Maybe they were listening to LaRouche's warnings, but you don't have to look at a $1.4 quadrillion derivatives bubble, which is growing. Could be 1.5, 1.6. No one knows. You don't know where this debt related to the derivatives bubble is. You have a look at the Australian circumstances, which is absolutely staggering, that at the June quarter, Australian banks had $23 trillion of notional principal capital value of derivatives off their balance sheets. And what's stunning is that this has grown by $1.5 trillion just in the 3 months up until June 30th. Now we're in October. What does that mean for June, July, August, September? You know, this is the trend. But how do you actually sign up $1.5 trillion worth of derivatives? Now these are the derivatives. These are the instruments that brought down Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. These were the catalysts for the global financial crisis, and nothing has changed. There's no implementation of Glass-Steagall to reorganise and reorientate the financial system towards a sane, regulated commercial banking system, which is what we're pushing for internationally with Mr. LaRouche, and it's been picked up everywhere. I mean, the Financial Times has written to the head of JP Morgan and actually said, Jamie Dimon, you better actually adopt Glass-Steagall because otherwise you won't survive.
Either, yeah.
So this is the same JP Morgan that's just been fined $13 billion by the authorities in the United States because of their role in selling these toxic instruments called derivatives. Now, you can't tell me that an institution that's up to its neck, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, all these sorts of institutions, they're up to their neck selling these derivatives that they know are designed to fall over, designed to entrap unwary buyers. That they don't know this crash is coming?
Exactly. And it was at a JP Morgan sponsored event in New York City in hockey's first overseas trip that he used this slogan, open for business. In fact, that was the title of his speech, Australia open for business. But what it is referring to is exactly the continuation and the extension of the derivatives bubble to put the banks ahead of the people, exactly the opposite to Glass-Steagall. Now, interestingly enough, the head of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, gave a speech only 9 days after Joe Hockey's speech. This was his first major speech on financial regulation, 24th October. And in that speech, one of the most dramatic statements he made was, 5 simple words describe our approach. We are open for business. Now that speech was called the UK at the heart of a renewed globalisation, and it actually pumped up the fact that Britain hosts half of all OTC, over-the-counter derivatives. They have the 3rd largest shadow banking system in the world. Their banking sector is 4 times the size of their national income. This is what he was bragging about, but he went on to talk about the new globalised banking world that they're envisioning post bail-in the bail-in measure meaning where banks will be forced to take money from their depositors in order to keep themselves going. And he talked about this in this way. He said, above all, banks must have substantial loss-absorbing capacity that cascades through their group structures. In other words, meaning that you've got to absorb your losses from within the banks. And he went on to say, we are the enemy of taxpayer bailouts. So confirming we won't bail you out, we're going to make the people that are investors in your bank, meaning ordinary depositors, pay.
And this is what I found really interesting here, Elisa, is that Joe Hockey's also come out, or the Abbott government has also come out saying we're going to make privatisation easier for state-owned assets. And they got on the chopping block $170 billion of designated state-owned assets for privatisation. Now this all falls under the category of user pays. Think about toll roads of the CityLink and the various toll roads in Sydney where the user pays. And the attitude is, well, if you use it, you pay for it. Well, it's now come to the banks. If you use the banks, you'll pay for it. So if you're, and their attitude is, and I'm not kidding, if you're silly enough to put your money in our bank, then you're silly enough to realise that you can lose it and we're happy to take it. That's the attitude of bail-in.
You're an investor in that bank, which redefines what a depositor is.
And that's the problem we're getting into now, is this concept of the general welfare, which is the basis of the Glass-Steagall, whereby the government exists for, of and by the people for the benefit of the future prosperity of generations of people. That the government is there to control this vicious financial capital. The City of London is what I'm talking about, which is what Carney's talking about, the UK. He's talking about the British Empire at the heart of renewed empire. Empire activities. Globalisation, empire are the same idea. So what you're seeing here is, and this is why we're reacting. We've had 2 shows now on this about Joe Hockey. People don't get it. They're going back to sleep. They think, oh, the election's over now. Joe Hockey's come in. He's going to look after us. Well, go back and look at your history. Go back and look at the 1927 through to about the 1938 period of our own history, where 1/3 of all people were unemployed. The banks wouldn't lend out the credit. We had a depression that was completely and utterly unnecessary, and it was a Conservative government, the forerunners of the Liberal Party, National Party that are in power today, that caused that. Now, so we're not talking out through our hat. We do have a publication called Defeat the Syndicate, which is a publication we put down in the height of the Howard years in 2002, which shows the pedigree of the Liberal Party. So when we're talking about this issue of bail-in, and we're talking about the privatisation issue, the globalisation, everything we're talking about with Mark Carney and the pedigree of Joe Hockey, we know those people extremely well from both a historical point of view, but from what the Howard government in particular did. And
of course Hockey has emphasised that he will be the head of the finance ministers' meetings that convene for the G20, and he has stressed the regulatory enhancements that the G20 is pushing, which is bail-in.
Well, it's the G20, the Financial Stability Board established with Rudd in 2009. It's brought out the key attributes for the resolution of banks, point 3 of which is bail-in. Australia has already adopted large measures of control of the banking system through APRA. We saw a whole raft of legislation adopted in 2010, which we did ahead of and in sync with actually the Dodd-Frank bill in the United States. So what we're going to get, I think we're going to see a bit of a perfect storm here, where you've got this storm of financial deregulation, or re-regulation in one sense, in the sense that the banks want to steal people's deposits, coming in with a renewed thrust with the G20 meetings.
And Mark Carney did say in his speech that they're working closely, with the Bank of England's working closely with the FSB to get this bail-in agenda through. He said, our aim is to complete the job by the next G20 summit in Brisbane, so that's November next year. And he did say of this new globalised system that the UK stands to benefit because of London's place at the heart of the global financial system. Now, in the next segment, we're going to look at moves to oppose that coming out of Eurasia and how London is trying to block it. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So now we'll look at London predators want to entrap Russia, China and India Development Alliance. Now, these three countries, Russia, China and India, in the past weeks have seen a flurry of meetings. The Indian leader going to both Russia and China, Medvedev, the Russian Prime Minister, travelling to Beijing, and so there were numerous intersections of these kinds of meetings, stepping up their collaboration both for development and for security. Now, what Lyndon LaRouche stressed about this is that he said these guys are preparing new treaty alliances among themselves in anticipation of what is estimated to be the consequences of the bail-in policy which is now pushing forward, which is essentially what we just discussed, of a whole new system of globalisation in this kind of new bail-in world. And LaRouche said, so this is perfectly justified. He said you have a coalition being formed for defence against the British Empire and what it represents. That's the situation. So these countries rightfully feel that their sovereignty, their development is threatened by that new system of globalisation, new financial system.
I think that's the real word there. The real crux of the matter is this issue of sovereignty, of national sovereignty, because you've got two opposing systems playing out within this particular agenda. First, on the one hand, you've got the British Empire run through the City of London and Wall Street financial conglomerates, and they intend to literally, through policies of bail-in, dictate to sovereign nation states and to the populations how the world's going to exist. And they have a policy of reducing population down to below 1 billion. That's been stated by the Queen, by Prince Philip, by other lackeys of the British Empire. That's opposed to the principle of what we call the Treaty of Westphalia, or the principle of the nation state, where the idea of national sovereignty is such that you have countries that have their own credit system, that they have their own ability for self-determination of their own peoples. Now, this was established under the Treaty of Westphalia back 400 years ago now, this concept of sovereignty. That is what's being played out here with Russia and with China. And look at India. Between Russia, China and India, particularly China and India, you have almost more than half the world's population. There were over 2.5 billion people, nearly a third of the world's population, or maybe a bit over a third. But the point is that these countries, if they don't embrace policies that are going to internally develop themselves, then they're going to have masses of starvation and death, and they know this.
So they're serious about developing, and they know if they want to develop, they best help their neighbours develop. The rising tide lifts all boats idea.
Well, this is the principle, the advantage of the other.
Exactly.
Is the principle of Westphalia. Yeah.
And the Chinese president put this to words in a beautiful way, actually, at a speech that he gave on 25th October to his party room, the Communist Party leadership. And he said essentially that friendship is the basic tenet of diplomacy, right? So contrast that to Syria and all of this nonsense. He said, a new outlook on security featuring mutual trust, reciprocity, equality and coordination should be adhered to. We should present clearly our policies to the world, tell China's story in an acceptable way, speak out so that we are heard, and interpret the Chinese dream from the perspective of the aspiration of all people in all countries for a better life and regional prosperity, and let the sense of common destiny take root with our neighbours. So this has driven certain people berserk, who shall remain nameless. But earlier this month, suffice it to say that the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, landed in China, announcing his intention that London will become the offshore banking centre for China and intend to corner 80% of the renminbi foreign exchange market. Now, on his return, he did an interview in the Financial Times, October 29th, and he said, I have already set out to ensure that the City of London is the home to fast-growing new markets, from Indian infrastructure funds to offshore Chinese renminbi. Now we have to set ourselves this ambition, to be the unrivalled Western centre for Islamic finance. And he also pointed out that Britain is already a major centre of Arab finance. Now, this was echoed by British Prime Minister David Cameron this week, who announced the creation of the first Islamic bond, the Sukuk, to be issued by the British Treasury. The London Stock Exchange will also launch the first Islamic market index, and this will allow Britain to tap into about £1.3 trillion of Islamic investments. So again, this is the agenda of allowing a shakeout of the global financial system with bail-in, stealing the deposits, creating a new financial system under this British nexus, and sabotaging anyone that attempts to resist that.
Well, you can see why we play a crucial role here in Australia of providing for people, even the people watching this show, the counter position. Because we are so bombarded by the Western media about this is the only way that you can go. Globalisation, privatisation, the supremacy of the financial markets, derivatives, all these things just have to be accepted because that's the only way.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, you need more of it.
And more of it, in China, and these guys, they're way off the planet. I mean, these they don't know what they're talking about. But if you look carefully at what China's doing, the development programs that it's proposing, the sort of diplomacy that you've just highlighted here, their idea is that friendship is the core of diplomacy, and that's completely different to the idea of the stronger of the species, right? The survival of the fittest, which are all British ideas. So, I mean, this is, there's reason to be optimistic, like LaRouche has said, that the more that the British continue to push these policies of hatred and of the strongest, the survival of the fittest and so forth, the more reaction there is to it, and the more resolve there is not to have this sort of a system. And that's why Glass-Steagall is getting a foothold right around the world, is because people see the alternative for what it is, basically British-inspired slavery under a different name.
Exactly. Now, after this break, we're going to look at how that system keeps politicians in line to keep up this task. Welcome back to the CEC Report. NSA spying not for information, for intimidation. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel was none too happy in the recent week or so when it was discovered that her mobile phone, her handy as they call them over there, had been tapped and listened to for around 10 years apparently. But the interesting thing, this is causing a stir not just between German-American relations, but even in the population, because it became quite apparent that she hadn't really reacted to this NSA spying scandal out of America until it was her personal phone that was, being listened to. So then she reacted. Now, the German government is sending 2 top intelligence officials to Washington to demand some answers regards to this. And they have also stated that they may summon Edward Snowden, who's exiled in Russia, as a witness if this case regarding Angela Merkel goes to court. Now, there was a big rally in Washington, D.C. on October 26, which was endorsed by Edward Snowden, and there was a couple of thousand people there and included a strong LaRouche pack presence. So there's been quite a reaction there. But we've noticed here in Australia there really has not been enough outrage, which potentially, Craig, is because we are a part of this Five Eyes alliance. We, together with the US, the UK, Canada and New Zealand, we're the ones doing the watching, doing the listening.
Well, I found it funny that Julia Gillard came out when she was asked about this too, and she says, well, I'm not really worried because I only say nice things about Barack Obama. So I mean,
you're right.
Goodness sake, what a ridiculous
Is there a bigger
comment.
issue here?
Where's the sovereignty issue? Why should Barack Obama and the Americans be allowed to spy on sovereign countries? Literally. Now, it's been going on for, spying is one of the oldest professions on, or if you want to call it a profession, on the face of the planet. It's been going on for ages. But to knowingly do it, that so-called collaborators and allies are doing it to each other, which is what the issue is with Merkel in part, is this is actually the truth of the intimidation, of the big stick idea of what Barack Obama actually represents. So here you have yet another highlight of the nature of this guy. He could can this very quickly, but he hasn't. He's been in there for a long time now, well over 4 years, closer to 5. And if he knew that they were spying on the sovereign heads of state, he could have canned it, but he didn't. Then I also want to quickly mention, you look at recent news in the United States where over 10 million people under Obamacare have literally been cut off from healthcare. They can't get it. So when they were previously getting, oncology care for cancer, now it's finished. So these people are being thrown on the scrap heap. This is Obamacare with the sort of fascism that we've warned about coming through.
And Obama and co are using these kinds of tapping tactics, etc., to get the goods on politicians, because they're constantly threatening them and warning them against going with things like Glass-Steagall. Now, of course, the model for this was the McCarthy era in the 1950s, 60s, through that period. And we want to introduce you today, our viewers and our audience, to the former Democratic congressman from New Jersey who served from 1959 to 73, Neil Gallagher. Now, he was a personal friend and colleague of JFK in the Congress through that period. He fought relentlessly against McCarthyism. He never did any deals. He was constantly threatened, bribed. He was slandered. His family was slandered. And he threatened them straight back. He said, I'm going to tell the truth about what J. Edgar Hoover is doing, and I'm going to make a speech giving the details, all the gory details, every day. And even when they offered to stop, he said, I don't care, I'm doing it anyway. He had guts. And I'm going to show out just a 2-minute clip here, because he said, and he spoke at a LaRouche PAC event in Washington this week, where he said that it's 10,000 times worse today, what we're going through of this kind of spying apparatus. So listen to this.
I gave it a try. I gave it a try, and I smashed my whole career as a result of it. I'm not sorry, because what the hell would be the sense of staying down there and not being able to look into the mirror or anything? And I think the overall picture of the emergency, the emerging of the police apparatus, secret police apparatus in America, which really came to a head with the Kennedy assassination, is today bigger and stronger than ever. And you don't really have a Hoover around today, but you have a heck of a lot of guys with the power that Hoover had, who are a little more quiet and a little more efficient in the exercise of that kind of power. And I worry very much about what the hell is going to happen to this country unless people become aware of it. The frailty of reputation and the ability to destroy it is so widespread now. As long as people in the Congress don't raise these questions about the role of the secret government in America, or the secret governments in America, or the real role of the secret societies in America, as long as there's no protection for them, they can be destroyed overnight. So the power of destroying people is a lot easier even now than it was then.
So this courageous individual put up a privacy bill to stop this kind of spying. It was put down. He was run out of Congress, and there's never been an attempt to have such a privacy bill again since. His district was redistricted, so he lost his seat, but many of his friends and colleagues and collaborators to shut down this Hoover apparatus ended up dead, so you could say he got out of it relatively well. But this is the kind of leader we need again today. Go to our website and have a look at this brilliant video. It'll be up there on the screen. Thanks for tuning in again to the CEC Report, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.